I used to work, but the stroke stopped that. Well, I couldn't remember the keys because there were alarms on everything, and you had a code to get through, and I just couldn't remember the keys. So I had to wait for everybody to come to work before I could get up to the office.
And then, I remember them coming in and saying, "Oh, look, she's had a brain, massive brain hemorrhage."
In terms of the ones who were involved who had the stroke, so the two youngest ones were both in their 30s. One was actually playing rugby for one of the clubs here. Big, fit boy, slim as, still is, and unbelievable that he got hit.
And I must admit, prior to my first dose of cancer, I did look at a reasonable amount of money going out every month and thinking, oh, really, surely if anything happens to me, I'll be in a situation where I'll get ACC or I'll get support or I'll get something, but of course that's not the case.
Sovereign was amazing, actually. They, when I was trying really hard to go back to work right at the start, and I shouldn't have, and I knew I was still quite sick, but I was determined not to be letting my business partner down. My account manager said, no, you're not actually able to.
The reality is you don't get back to normal at all. You get back to a new normal, but that is actually quite different from what normal was. So, and most people probably don't recognise that.
I actually had the luxury, because I had the insurance, I had the luxury to look around for what I wanted to do, which led me to wanting to work, to study. Thank goodness Asteron is still, providing for me.
The income insurance was, invaluable. I can't even begin to say how handy it was, and particularly for someone like myself where there is no other source of income. So I don't have a partner or a husband who's saying, well, that's all right, dear, you carry on being sick and I'll just pay the mortgage.
Yeah, I honestly can't think of where we would be if we hadn't have got that income protection insurance.
Well, we wouldn't have attempted to build this house without it. There's no way we'd be in a much smaller house somewhere.
So essentially what having this income insurance has allowed me to do is to keep living absolutely as I had before.
Welcome, I'm Peter Nielsen, the Chief Executive of the Financial Services Council, and those short vignettes are a wonderful reminder of the great work that the industry actually does. That $1 billion worth of claims each year over the last 5 years, but basically being there to help people in their moment of need is the core business of our sector, and it's always nice to have a reminder of how much that is valued by the people who have to make a claim. About 5 years ago, the predecessor organisation of the FSC funded some work from Massey University on underinsurance in New Zealand. The major conclusion that came out of that report was the one area where most people were vulnerable and were least likely to have coverage was in relation to income protection insurance. In fact, that most people had, for example, insurance on their home, most people had insurance on their car, but by and large, most people did not have insurance against their income, the most likely and most valuable asset that they actually held. Out of that exercise, the industry responded to those messages. It basically said, we'll go out there and we will find ways of making policies more acceptable and more accessible and easier to understand. We will, as an industry, start talking about all the different forms of income protection insurance under one heading called income protection insurance, rather than that, using that simply to refer to one of those various means by which people are helped when illness means that they can't continue to have an income. And as a consequence of that, whereas when the Massey survey was done, only about 1 in 5 of New Zealand families actually had income protection cover. That has now moved so that it's about 1 in 4. We have a lot further to go, but one of the reasons why we have a lot further to go is we found that many people do not understand the circumstances that would require assistance. And very much, even though we have multiple ways we can deal with that problem, none of us are likely to take that step unless we actually are fully aware of the likelihood of that event occurring. So that's why we did the update of that material, which you'll hear about this morning. With 1,000 New Zealand families a week being impacted by illness that will be for 3 months or more, that will prevent employment, this is a very serious issue across the whole of the country. But most of us, of course, don't necessarily want to contemplate the possibility of having a long-term illness that will prevent us from being employed. So it is our job, in fact, to make sure that there is a conversation about our vulnerability and what we can do about it. This morning, we'll hear the updated statistics, the material about how do we measure who is vulnerable and how vulnerable they are, which will make it possible for us to have better conversations with the people who need to be protected. We'll talk about people who work in the front line with people who actually have the devastation of a health crisis that often becomes also a financial crisis. We'll also be talking about what we can do about addressing those issues so that people have a better idea of where they stand and what they need to do in order to be able to deal with those issues. None of this would have been possible without the support of the FSC members, and a number of them have generously also sponsored this day's event and other attachments to this particular program. Companies like Partners Life, Fidelity Life, Cigna, Asteron, Sovereign and the reinsurer SCORE have all agreed to put money additional to their membership fee in order to make these activities possible. And we thank them sincerely for that work and that contribution, because without that support this event would not have been possible and nor would have been the research that was done to back it up. Okay, so this morning is not the beginning of the end, it's the beginning of a very big program. In a couple of weeks we will have a website that will contain much of the material that's here today. We will also be providing advisory material in terms of a booklet in respect of these circumstances, so people who need to advise, whether you're a social worker, Partners Life, whether you're in the industry, to help people know what their rights and responsibilities and opportunities are if they do have all agreed to put money additional to their membership fee. And also, between about January and about March of next year, we will be doing quite extensive online advertising to the people who are most vulnerable, but also who have the capability of actually making a difference in this area by taking steps to prepare. So this morning is not an event that they don't want to happen, but they do need to be prepared for. So with no further ado, I will ask Diana Clement to come and speak. She is our MC for the day. She's also going to be the interviewer. We wanted a program that was pretty quick moving, but also gave the opportunity for people to ask questions. And so we thought we would have an MC. And in terms of the people who would be eligible and credible in that role, somebody who actually had experience with covering these issues, not always necessarily loving us every day of the week, but basically good credibility about the issues. And so therefore we invited Diana to do that, and she kindly accepted that role. So